It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
From a depreciation point of view, these houses, they're older, they're quite fully depreciated, and we're finding some investors have started to realise that there's actually more modern stock in neighbouring or more appealing suburbs that might only be 10 or 15 years old.
And that is Chris Hinchliffe in Perth on the Real Estate Breakfast this morning as we launch into another episode with more property information and connecting you to the largest real estate podcast library across Australia every morning. And we are, as you know, doing that 7 days a week. And you can hear us anytime, anywhere on iHeartRadio, also Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Amazon. It's been a long week here. I don't know what the week has looked like at your place, but we have finally arrived. A Friday morning, it is March the 14th. Can you believe 2 weeks into March already? Now, Perth's property market surged in 2024. Some suburbs, as we've talked about and highlighted, experiencing record-breaking growth, and a shrinking housing pool and FOMO saw buyers snapping up rundown homes, pushing prices up to unprecedented levels. Buyers' agents played a bit of a major role, driving demand in areas like Armidale, where values skyrocketed. However, early signs of a price corrections are emerging, with some suburbs now tracking lower. Could this be the signal of a bit of a market shift? Well, this morning we are catching up with Chris Hinchliffe from Perth, from Herron Todd White. And a very good morning to you, Chris. Welcome to the Real Estate Breakfast this morning.
Thanks, Craig. Good morning to you.
So where was the start of this cycle? Perhaps we can start there. And what triggered all the activity?
Yeah, good question, Craig. It's very interesting to reflect on the growth that Perth lacked compared to the East Coast. And a good sign of that was the median house price in Perth in 2020 was actually the same as that in 2007. So the price growth that the East Coast experienced, Perth missed out on. We had a couple of cycles in between, but wasn't able to maintain any traction. And then it all came down to migration. We had a significant population intake through 2020 it's still ongoing now. And of course, in that post-COVID period, supply simply wasn't able to keep up with demand. So a large part of it was population growth on the back of very low entry prices compared to other areas in Australia.
Yeah, now I mentioned that buyers' agents, they did flood into these areas like Armidale, pushing prices to those unexpected levels. What was it about those suburbs that attracted so much interest, and why did the strategy work so well for them, do you think?
I think there was a very low capital value in a lot of these suburbs. They were very unloved suburbs in a lot of instances, not in all, but in a lot. The entry level was low, and Armidale, for example, in 2020, you're able to buy a 3-bedroom house on a full block for circa $200,000, which seems ridiculous in a capital city. But the rents on those properties went from $250 per week to $500 per week in a very short period of time. So not only did the growth outlook look really good, the yield also looked very strong.
Now, you've pointed out that the capital value growth outpaced rental increases, creating inconsistencies. Now, could that, in your mind, lead to long-term stability issues? And how do you see this playing out for investors and owner-occupiers?
Yeah, we're watching that very closely at the moment. The price levels have now stabilised in many of these areas, such as Armidale. There's still a little bit of upward pressure on rental stock, but because we have had so many investors come into the market, there's more rentals available, and there's a little bit of a flight to quality going on. So while we're seeing the median rental price increase, it's because there's more quality homes being leased, and then some of these older or less loved properties, we're seeing some rental reductions starting to occur. So what we're following now is there a secondary layer of demand? And we're confident there is. It's just a matter now of at what value level. And what we're seeing in some of these areas is first home buyers who are the traditional support of demand in these areas. They're not prepared to pay those prices yet. There's better value in surrounding suburbs. Are we going to see a flood of rental stock come to the market or investor stock come to the market? I don't think so. I think that the investors that bought pre-2024, they bought at good values and the yields remain very strong. That's what they're receiving. Are we going to see new investors come in? Probably not. So I think we're going to have a period of stability while the market works out what people are prepared to pay. The reality is we're still in a housing crisis and have a rental vacancy rate sub 2%. It's just a matter of whether the housing stock in these areas is what renters are looking for. So it might come down to investors having to improve that stock to make it more appealing.
I just want some feedback from you with regard to buyers' agents. They've moved on and values are stagnating a little bit. So what risks do you see? You touched on the investors starting to sell off, arguably selling off en masse. Could that actually create oversupply and potential price corrections? What do you think?
It could, but we're not seeing that happening. Essentially, if the investors are going to sell off, they need something else to be able to buy and something that's more attractive, and especially from a yield point of view. So we're not seeing mass transactions happening yet or mass listings coming to market in these areas yet. And if they do, I think that would lead to a bit of a correction, but the underlying demand is still strong. We're still seeing 900 to 1,000 sales per week in Perth. We only have 5,000 total listings on market, and a balanced market is circa 12 to 13,000 listings. So I think on the back of that, plus sustained population growth, we'll have more stability, probably some price corrections in a few suburbs that were oversold, but we don't see there's going to be a mass correction.
All right, we're talking to Chris. He is our man on the ground there in Perth, WA, this morning on our Friday. When we come back, we'll talk about depreciation and stock quality concerns and also some of those suburbs to watch out for in the future in Perth. We'll do that after this.
Every morning from 6 a.m. across Australia, we deliver you the latest property news, commentary and predictions from Perth to Cairns and from Melbourne to Brisbane, 7 days a week.
And right now it's time for another property tip, and this time we are going into the east of Melbourne. Once again, catching up with Simon Burns, an award-winning real estate agent. Simon, what have you got for us this morning?
I think the best advice I can give is the best research you can do is the research you do yourself. Don't rely on others to do that. There are a lot of buyers agents around. By all means, use them, but do your own research to make sure you're getting the best deal.
Yeah, so when somebody is engaged with a buyer's agent, I think the key thing is just don't automatically assume that the buyer's agent is going to know everything. I think that's what you're saying. Do the due diligence, and then you can talk to the buyer's agent and say, look, are you covering this ground?
Yes, 100%. I feel that like if you've got a buyer's agent and you're very comfortable with them, 100% go with that person. And if they align with what your feelings are and in investing in the market, yeah, look at those people.
Every morning from 6 a.m, we bring you the latest real estate news with diverse perspectives from leading industry experts. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week.
And it is a Real Estate Friday. With us is Chris from Perth, getting a little bit of a rundown on what is happening in the market. And you mentioned that much of the stock isn't high quality and that depreciation could be a major issue. How significant do you think that this factor will be in shaping future price trends in some of these suburbs?
There's plenty to play out. So what we've seen is that many of the investors were targeting the lower priced stock. And we need to remember that many of these properties are 40, 50, 60-year-old basic 3-bedroom houses. And in our experience, a lot of them are in original condition or have undergone a basic renovation at best. As we see a flight to quality in the rental market, investors are going to have a choice. They're going to have to either keep up with that demand and therefore improve that property, or if they don't, then they might be finding that it takes a little bit longer for their property to rent, or they might have to adjust their expectations in terms of asking price. So the interesting part is when you analyse the market, there's, from a depreciation point of view, these houses, they're older, they're quite fully depreciated, and we're finding some investors have started to realise that there's actually more modern stock in neighbouring or more appealing suburbs that might only be 10 or 15 years old that do offer depreciation benefits that are actually selling for the same price. So it's a matter of just the education of the buyer to see what opportunities are around. But yeah, that older stock is going to experience some challenges.
Now, you've highlighted areas like Baldivis, Ellenbrook and Armidale as some of the key areas to monitor. What market trends, for those listening, are emerging in those suburbs, and how should investors or buyers approach them moving forward? Where's the good money, I guess, is what I'm asking you there, Chris.
Yeah, these are always our bellwether suburbs. So they're large areas that typically have a large amount of stock, and so they're a good test as to what's happening in the market as a whole, because you can start to see those listings rise and prices adjust first in comparison to most other areas in Perth. What we're seeing is that buyers have a bit more choice. There are a few more listings around, especially in places like Armidale. But overall, the transaction levels are very strong in areas like Baldivis and Ellenbrook. So that gives us comfort that there is secondary layers of support in some of these suburbs. It's the older stock that we're more concerned about, and that's where we come back to Armidale as an area that we're watching closely.
Well, I mentioned that we are 2 weeks into March, and where does the Perth property market go to from here? What happens next?
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting year. We're still quite bullish about the market as a whole. Underlying demand is strong. Listing activity, properties are getting absorbed as soon as they come to market in most areas, but it's a flight to quality and a flight to amenity. So people have equity, they have relative job security and strong wages. So what we're seeing is that the more desirable areas are still experiencing very significant demand, and it's those secondary locations that were perhaps oversold by that buyer agent activity where we might see a bit of a correction, but we don't see that affecting the market as a whole. It's just a matter of rebalancing some of these areas that have just overshot the mark slightly. We think it's going to be a strong year otherwise.
Well, there's always something happening in the property market. We can always say that. Chris, thank you so much for showing up this morning on the Real Estate Breakfast. And as mentioned, you're from Herron Todd White, and no doubt you're going to be pretty busy as the months move forward.
Yep, certainly looks that way. Thanks very much, Craig. Appreciate the chat.
Whether you're a seasoned investor or a first-time buyer, know your property with us on the Real Estate Podcast.
And if we come back to the nuts and bolts with the agents, of course, not all agents are equal. Choosing the right one, I mean, that is such a big step.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously buyers are out there. They're dealing with all these different types of agents. Some are easier to buy from than others. You know, some agents are they pressure their owners more than they pressure buyers. A lot of owners were coming to us and asking questions midway through their sales campaign saying, you know, the agent's telling me that I've got this offer, it's the best one they can get, and I don't know whether I should be accepting this offer or not. I really am confused and don't understand why the campaign isn't going that well. And the problem is, of course, when you're in the process of selling a property, once you're down that path, once you've engaged that agent, your cooling off period on an agency agreement, well, there's one in New South Wales, but it lasts 48 hours. By the time you've realised you've made a bad decision of an agent, you're stuck.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.